Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar, How to Get Your Board on Board with Granting. My name is Kavita Dogra. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Communications and Development Manager here at ONN. If you're new to ONN, welcome. We are the provincial network for Ontario's 58,000 nonprofits and charities focused on policy, advocacy, and services to strengthen Ontario's nonprofit sector as a key pillar of our society and economy. If you are already a member of ONN, welcome back and thank you for your support. Our public policy research and advocacy work would not be possible without you. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please type it into the chat box and I'll respond as soon as possible. We encourage you to ask questions through the Q&A box, but you can also do that through chat. You're welcome to share comments and learnings on social media. To answer our most common question, you will receive an email with a recording and slides from both presenters and resources in 1 week. To ground our webinar today, I want to begin with acknowledging that we're meeting on unceded and unsurrendered land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from time immemorial. The ONN office is located on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. I'm not in the office, as you can see my home background. I am grateful to live, work, and play on and within the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation and William Treaty's signatories of the Mississauga and Chippewa Nations. At ONN, we believe that as nonprofits, we must take seriously our role in responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. On a personal note, I am the child of 2 immigrants who moved here from India, and though I was born here, I spent my formative years in India, and I've always considered myself a global citizen. As we bear witness to multiple and ongoing genocides in the world, like in Palestine, Congo, Sudan, and more, in the last few months especially, I have been interrogating the ways in which I uphold systems of oppression and learning how I can help to dismantle them. I've been thinking a lot about what it means for me to stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island, but also around the world, and how I can tangibly support ideas of land sovereignty and decolonization. So to move on to the topic at hand, we're here to chat about granting. So ONN receives inquiries about grant resources and templates on a regular basis from our network. We know the current granting environment can be tough, in addition to just the fundraising environment in general. Our goal today is to help nonprofits get grant ready internally to hopefully improve their application outcomes. An important piece of this puzzle can be a nonprofit or charity board. Sometimes boards can encourage innovation and other times they can be a barrier. ONN has done a lot of work in the area, as you may know, of reimagining governance in order to help nonprofits break the mold in how they understand their board structure and governance, including decision-making at the board level. We believe that challenging the status quo around boards and moving towards a shared leadership model can help nonprofits and the communities they serve thrive. So if you'd like to learn more about that project, I'll share a link in the chat to our Reimagining Governance Lab, which does include a lot of tools and templates and inspirational stories from nonprofits and charities from the sector who have embarked on this journey, and you may find those useful. For now, if your board is not on board with granting, what can help them see the value in granting? Our first presenter will provide some insights on this. So please welcome our first presenter, Rohit Mehta. Rohit is the founder and lead consultant of Do Good Fundraising, a University of Toronto grad. He's been active in the sector for 18 years. He was appointed to a 5-year term with the grant review team of OTF and served a 2-year term with the grant review committee of the Ministry of Children and Youth Services Youth Opportunities Fund. Rohit reviewed and assessed over 300 grant applications and distributed over 60 million in funding to community-based nonprofits, charities, and grassroots groups. His social enterprise business, Do Good Fundraising, has raised $10 million for charities and nonprofits and offers services which help organizations to raise more money. So over to you, Rohit.
Thank you so much, Kavita, and thank you to the Ontario Nonprofit Network and to everyone who turned out today for the workshop. I really appreciate your time, and we're going to talk about how to get your board on board. So I'm going to jump right into it here. So very briefly, a quick overview of what we do. We write grant applications, we find grants, we train on grants, we do consulting work, and we have a membership program as well, all with the goal to help you raise more money. So in today's presentation, we're going to talk about why granting is such a critical piece to diversifying the fundraising in your organization. We'll talk about how you can communicate this to your board, and then we'll talk about evaluating the value of your staff time that you put into pursuing grants. So let's get into it. First, let's cover why granting is critical in fundraising. So I want to talk a little bit about the fact that grants form a really important part of your fundraising mix. Your fundraising mix is the different types of fundraising that you do in an organization. Perhaps it's special events, perhaps it's working with individual donors, perhaps you're working with third parties. And so grant writing is right in the middle of that, and it makes up part of the pie. If you could picture a pie chart, a portion would be grant writing, a portion would be events, third-party engagements, donors, and so on. And so there's really three things that I want to share. Firstly, that granting is critical because it brings in new institutional relationships. I also want to say that grants are an integral part of that process when you're engaging with donors. And of course, winning grants leads to more grants.
Rohit, sorry, we've had a request for you to turn up your mic if possible. I think folks are having a tough time hearing you.
All righty. I'm just going to pull in a little bit more. I hope that's better.
It is. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. So thank you for that. So let's chat a bit about why granting is critical. And really, I think when you begin a granting relationship, what you're doing is you're beginning a relationship with the granting institution or body. And like any relationship, it starts with having that communication and dialogue. So you might ask yourself, well, why should we pursue grants? There's so much work, and I've heard folks get declined quite often. Well, the moment you start filling out a grant application, you're knocking on the door. You're saying, hey, our organization does good work. We're now approaching you. Can we come in? Right? And I think the conversation that happens once they open the door is a conversation that's eventually, hopefully, ideally going to help your organization to win a grant. But when you start, that's what enables you to have that conversation. And the relationship that you're going to have with foundations, corporations, government institutions, it is going to lead to bigger things for your organization. It'll lead to long-term outcomes, not just for grants, but maybe for other types of support. And we also know that funders are, that should say, well connected. Funders are very well connected to one another, and they often talk to each other. And so right away, you having a relationship with that institution is going to lead to additional benefits. Granting is also incredibly important because it allows you to engage with corporations. Okay, so any corporation, think about the last place where you ate, maybe a fast food place, maybe the last place you purchased clothing. They often have a granting body that is an official body. It's managed through usually their own grant system or a third-party process, and grants are part of that process when engaging with corporate donors. It is very rare for you to go to a Fortune 500 company and ask them for support and for them to literally write you a check and just give it to you. That almost never happens. They go through a process in order to be fair and transparent. And so corporate donors want you to knock on the door, fill out that grant application, and then they'll open the door and begin having some dialogue, right? So corporations use grant applications to really streamline the requests that come in. Sometimes it's hundreds of requests. A major fast food giant in North America might receive thousands of requests. And so they often give in the communities where they have a presence. This is what we notice in our prospect research, that corporate giving tends to be, if the corporation is in Brampton, Ontario, they're probably going to give to Brampton-based organizations. But then you have multinational mega corporations. They're everywhere. They're the stores where you buy your groceries, you buy goods. They're all over the province and all over the country, and sometimes all over North America. And so, again, going through the process of engaging with them really starts with granting, and that's why it's so important if you want corporate support from those institutions. So, granting is also an interesting thing. It's like a domino effect. You win one grant, and now you're finding that you take the winning, the news of that grant, the success of that grant, and you use it as leverage to win your next one. So funders very often will ask applicants, what's your track record of success with previous projects? Literally, the question we'll see very often is, what is your previous history of managing successful projects? Tell us about your past history with grants. Tell us about how you've managed budgets similar to this grant application. How have you effectively executed on similar projects? They're all various ways of saying, did you win grants before? Okay, tell us that you won, and then we'll give you more grants, right? So with each successive grant, you can often request more funding. And one thing I like to tell organizations is that the money you bring in and the money you spend, that forms your budget. And often it appears in your financial statements. And when you show this to institutions, they look at your past history of what you've spent and what you've brought in, and it gives you legitimacy. So granting is critical because the moment you receive a grant, you're now more legitimate. You have real expenditures. Your organization is active. It's taking grant money and it's doing good things with it. And so funders are more likely to trust you to give more money to you because folks have trusted you in the past. You've managed that money well and you've executed on those deliverables. And so, of course, funders are more they're more willing to fund your organization, and winning grants actually leads to more grants. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is communicating the importance of granting to your board. I've been in board meetings where sometimes folks who are maybe a little bit new to granting or new to the board, they might say, why are we wasting our time, right? Why are we doing this work? When I was involved with the Ontario Trillium Foundation, what people would say to me all the time in the community was, we've tried and tried applying to this foundation. We can't get in. Our grants keep getting declined. And we would encourage them that you gotta keep applying. You gotta keep doing it. But I think when it comes to the importance of granting, there's a few things that I want to say here. When it comes to getting your board on board and interested in granting, number one, you have to highlight the importance of grants for your organization's growth, right? That if you want to continue to grow, if you want to pay staff and you want to, be part of this sector, the organizations that are doing really well, they do receive grants and they do use that money to do good work and to compensate people really well. And so I think that is so important. So for growth and impact, it's about sharing relevant and timely opportunities with the team so that you're not just talking about grants as a concept, but you're talking about an upcoming grant that actually has a deadline and you can apply for it. You actually start by drafting the grant application and encouraging the board to get involved. And when it comes to communicating the importance of grants, when you win a grant, that generates a lot of enthusiasm, and so you want to build on that. Okay, so let's explore this a bit. Highlighting the importance of grants, right? if you want to convince your board that they should take on a grant, you should showcase successful examples of similar projects that have been funded by other institutions. So pick any Fortune 500 um, organization, go on their website and go on the corporate social responsibility section. They will show you real examples of grants that they've given. If you can find an example that relates to your work and say to your board, hey, here's another youth shelter that got a grant. We could be that too. Or, hey, here's another food bank that got a grant. Can you imagine us getting a similar grant from this corporation? They might be more willing to jump on board because they can see themselves in the grant. You also want to highlight the positive impact that other grants have had on the community or on other organizations or on that cause. Um, I think, for instance, an organization that supports children, there's a major grocery retailer that supports children through their charity. They're having a huge impact, right? And it's really well showcased on their website. And so, if your organization is thinking of applying, you should really show those examples of how money was given, it was used to fund programs, it was used to grow that organization's cause or impact. And I think you need to emphasize that when you support granting as an organization, what you're doing is you're supporting a new revenue generation stream that aligns with the organization's missions and goals. So what our boards need to understand is that this is really critical to help grow the impact of the organization. You need additional revenue streams to do that. And that's what I think you should start by highlighting when you're having that conversation. I also think that you want to share relevant and timely grant opportunities. I get so many calls where people say, Rohit, we need grants. And that's fine. We all need grants, but there are certain grants that are coming due, say, in the next 30 days. And those grant opportunities are often open, they're available, your organization is hopefully eligible, and you can apply. That's what you want to share with them. It's not that motivating for a board member to hear that there's a grant due in September or October. They might not really be interested right now, but if there's a grant due on February 22nd, and there are grants due every month throughout the year, they might be more willing to act because it's relevant. Now, ONN does a great job. They send a newsletter which always has grant opportunities, and I highly encourage you to read it. It's one of the only newsletters that I read thoroughly because of that section. Do Good Fundraising offers some free resources as well. In the past years, we've really started focusing on our members, but we still share. Occasionally, we share things on social media. Occasionally, we'll share a newsletter that's free. Many funders actually post on social media. And I was chatting with a board the other day, and I said to them, it's interesting that a funder will post about a grant, and most people won't like it, or they won't repost it or reshare it. You really should do that. Surprisingly, the funding institutions are actually looking at who's liking their posts, who's tweeting and that sort of thing. Even the CEO of these major funding institutions, the CEOs are there on their phone and they're looking, hey, we put out a post, who's engaging with it. And so they're putting this information out there. They're often doing it for free as well. You can then take some of that information and present it to your board to say, hey, here's a great opportunity for our organization to get this grant. And it's as simple as sharing a social media post or sharing an ONN newsletter to then get your board excited about granting. Has to be relevant, has to be timely. Now, you also want to bring the board into this work, okay? Collaboration is really important because if a board feels engaged, if they feel part of the process, they're going to take ownership of it. And you really want your board to take ownership here. So when you're starting on a grant application, start by asking everyone on the board level, hey, we're working on this grant application. Do folks have ideas, suggestions? Maybe your team has already decided which program you're going after. You can still seek input, okay? So you want to make it easy for board members to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves and that they're part of the process, as opposed to a process that's happening and they're just observing, right? So one of the ways you can do this is to use collaborative software. We have all sorts of cloud-based tools. I'm so grateful that Google Docs exists, for instance, because Google has put in a lot of the investment and lots of Silicon Valley-based companies are putting together amazing technologies right now that we can leverage as the sector. But I think Google Docs is my number one recommendation for creating a collaborative space where you can work on a grant application as a team, and everyone can see that process, and it's very transparent. Office 365 has an online version. There's tons of other web-based platforms, but I don't encourage you to work in isolation. Don't just work on a Word document and save it to your hard drive. Share it with everyone. Let them know that you're working on this proposal. Give them a fair amount of time to also review it, add comments, add input, and you'll find that by encouraging the board to provide their input, you're going to have a more uh, sort of collaborative approach to granting, and that the board will be on board from day one. Okay. Now, you must celebrate. It's so important that when you win a small grant, even a few $1,000s, $5,000, you want to generate some excitement for it. Okay. There's nothing like the excitement of winning a grant and saying, you know what, we weren't sure about this granting thing, but now we won and we're happy about it and we want to do more. So build on this excitement, and as soon as you win a grant, send out a message, celebrate. You guys can take maybe a picture as a board and put it up on social media and say, hey, we're just at our board meeting and we're really excited about this grant. And then you can build on that win and say, hey, everybody, I know I brought this grant opportunity to you, and some of you might have been unsure about it. Well, now there's another grant due in another 30 days. If we won this one, we can probably win that one. And people will jump on board. Board members will say, yes, this is something we believe we can do. And you go from your small grant, maybe a micro grant, and you get a little bit bigger, and you start to grow in terms of the levels of grants that you take on. But it really begins with working on grants at a small scale, hopefully winning them, and then celebrating that and building on the enthusiasm. And obviously, you have to do your research. Obviously, the grant that you're applying for, you must be eligible. You should spend time writing it really well. That's what's going to lead to success. But I think when it comes to granting, celebration is really critical if you want your board to be enthusiastic about the grant and to get on board. Okay. So let's talk about evaluating staff time, right? Because the administrative time that goes into grants is one of the biggest concerns that folks have, and for good reason. Even in our line of work, about 50% of the work we do is administrative, and it can be very heavy, right? But I think when it's done effectively, and I think when it's done efficiently, your grants can actually be worth the time that you invest into it, okay? So program and project grants definitely have high ROI, return on investment. There's certainly more value, as I talked about earlier, when you look at all the different fundraising methods that are out there. This is part of the mix. It's part of the diversified fundraising mix. But I would say this element of a diverse fundraising mix has higher value when compared to some of the other methods. And I'll get into that in a second. Now, third parties can actually also reduce your administrative burden. That's part of the reason why we're delivering this webinar. We do this work for organizations across the province. So let's just talk about this a little bit more in depth. The higher ROI. Program and project grants bring in money, and the money they bring in is often much higher than the money you put in or the time you put in to do the work. Okay. So let's say, for instance, our grants at Do Good Fundraising, we're very efficient. We spend 10 to 20 hours on the average grant, right? We've built it down to a process. We have an admin team, operations team, everything moves like a well-oiled machine. In your organization, the first time you apply, it might take you a little bit longer. But I think a lot of government and foundation grants can yield even up to $10,000 in your first attempt. We've seen a real reduction in the barriers to granting for first-time applicants. It's been an amazing thing during COVID. I've never seen it before, that granting institutions have reduced the number of questions, reduced the mandatory requirements, and reduced the barriers for institutions and organizations like yours to apply. And so they're actually encouraging grassroots groups. They're encouraging first-time attempts. You can always contact them as well and get a little bit of help in your first time. My point is that the ROI on this, can you imagine, you put on a small scale fundraiser, you were able to raise, $5,000 or $10,000, but you put 50 hours of staff effort versus a grant, maybe you put 20 hours of effort. This one yielded a little bit of money, 5,000 to 10,000, and this one yielded, say, 10,000 on your first attempt, right? Obviously, there's tons of different types of fundraising and the yields are different. But in my experience, having worked in different areas of fundraising, I find that for the amount of effort that you put in, grants tend to yield a much higher ROI. Sometimes it can be 2 times as much ROI. Sometimes it can be more, 4 times, 5 times the ROI. You put in, I don't know, $5,000 worth of time over a period of months, and you could probably win $25,000 in grants, right? Assuming that you're not actually going to win every single grant you apply for, but generally, if you start applying for grants, a number of them will be successful. The more you apply for, the more success you're going to have. Okay. Now, remember to calculate the time that your staff are putting in when you're trying to calculate the actual return on investment. So anytime board members are working on the grant, you can monetize that and estimate how much time went into it. Anytime staff are spending working on aspects of the grant, that's valuable as well. But I really challenge you to calculate how much time goes into different methods of fundraising, and maybe once a year do a comparison. And the stuff that's requiring a heavy investment of staff time and is yielding a low return on investment, don't do it anymore, right? Now, when it comes to value, this is really what I just spoke about. That when compared to things like special events, mail outs, even some marketing campaigns, the value is higher. I was just speaking with a client this morning, and it's an organization that wants to do a campaign, and they want to actually scale back the campaign. Unfortunately, they had this great idea. We're going to raise this much money, and now they kind of want to raise this much. And I said to them, I said, if you and your team are scaling back the campaign, wouldn't it be better if you actually took that time and just invested it into grants? It would probably yield a higher return. And campaigns, for instance, can be a very heavy in terms of the investment, right? So as I said, calculate all the meetings, calculate everything that you're doing, and figure out what that cost is for you, and then you'll understand the value that grants bring. And of course, they do require some upfront investment and planning. Planning is really important. We spend a lot of time with our clients planning out the projects that they're applying for, looking at the strategy, determining if there's a fit. Sometimes we actually convince our clients not to apply for a grant. We'll say that there is not a fit, or maybe they don't have enough time to finish all the planning that goes into the grant. So it's certainly a higher value to apply for grants, but don't forget that you must put in some investment of time and planning and strategy, just like you would when compared to other fundraising methods. Okay, so just wrapping up here, third parties can reduce the administrative burden. ONN is amazing. They provide a number of resources. I really encourage you to contact ONN if you need help in this area. They can also introduce you to us, but I think as a leader and a voice for the sector in Ontario, the resources that they give can really help your organization to be more successful. And I also want to say that board members, they're not always required to take on all the steps of the process. When it comes to grants, admin staff can help, third parties can help as well. So take advantage of your resources. And so at this point, we'll just open it up for any burning questions. And thanks so much for your time and attention. And I'm just seeing the chats here. I'm just going to read one or two of these. Awesome. So please subscribe to the ONN newsletter. There's a helpful link. Would you include the number of hours of grant writing in the grant as part of the in-kind contribution? I wouldn't, and I'll tell you why. When you're applying for a grant, what they're saying is, what program or project do you want funded, right? As part of that program or project, you're going to receive an administrative line item. Generally, it's up to 15% of the grant. You can do what you'd like with that admin line item. So I think the funder expects that if some admin time went into the grant, you would cover it from there. Can you specify what it is you define as an organization? I work with small grassroots groups who don't yet have charitable status. So interestingly, Sarah, different funders will define applicants differently. The Ontario Trillium Foundation, for example, requires your organization to be registered as a not-for-profit or a charity, and you must have 1 year of financial history. In other words, 1 full year of experience in spending money and running programs, and that has to be documented in a financial statement. Other granting bodies that, it's not, a name isn't coming to mind right now, but they'll say grassroots applicants can apply. right? Even small grassroots groups who don't have charity status. In fact, many of the organizations who apply for grants are actually nonprofits. Where charity status is often involved is with corporate foundations, private foundations, family foundations. They are charities, and very often they require charity status, and you can't apply without it. But small grassroots groups, nonprofits are certainly eligible for a number of grants. Of course, charitable groups are eligible for like all the grants. Shelly, how do you get feedback on your grant applications when not successful, especially government? Yes. So many of our clients struggle with this piece. Do Good Fundraising will jump on any call with any organization, even if we didn't write the grant. And what we do is we request that call, and then during the call, we take a lot of notes and we ask some tough questions. And everybody has the right to reach out to the funder and ask for feedback on a grant application that was declined. You have the right, especially publicly funded institutions. That's definitely mandated that you can contact them and ask for feedback. Email them or call them, and if they don't respond, just follow up with them. I think that's it for me.
Okay, well, thank you, Rohit. There's lots of good tips in there. And don't worry, folks, you will get the slides. And I know someone has to leave early. You will also get a link to the recording. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our second presenter, Christine Kesher. Thank you so much for joining us. And Christine is the controller of the NPO division at Enkel. Prior to joining Enkel, Christine was very active in the nonprofit accounting and audit sector in Ontario, where she was an accounting professor at the School of Business at Conestoga College, a leadership finance coach and consultant, and executive director at Cambridge Shelter Corporation. Christine brings over 30 years of finance and bookkeeping experience to the table and is passionate about the nonprofit sector and helping organizations better manage their finance and operations. Christine holds a BACC from Goodman School of Business at Brock University. So over to you.
Vita. I guess I can't say that I'm 29 anymore with my 30 years experience, but thank you for the intro. Rohit, I found your presentation very, very good and very enlightening. So thank you for that. I'm honored to be here. I still live in Cambridge, Ontario. I work for a company called Enkel Back Office Solutions out of Vancouver, BC. We provide back office accounting, bookkeeping, and contract CFO and controllership services. And what I want to talk to you about today is the importance of a high quality budget when you're presenting this to your board, but also your funder. It's really important. And Rohit touched on a lot of really good points that I'll probably be pulling back in when he was talking about that admin line on grant applications. And I'm going to be giving you a little bit of a background of a grant that I applied to a few years ago with Trillium, and it was approved and we did get the funds. So I wanted to kind of walk you through how we created that budget and what extra work we did to ensure that we were aligned with not only what the grantor was requiring, but we went a little bit above and beyond as well to ensure that we could prove that not only was the program that we were presenting to Trillium a good fit, but also that there was a need. And we ensured that our budget really was a good indication of the costs that it would require. In this case, the budget was over half a million dollars for 3 years. And we really had to do a lot of thinking around the budget and the related costs that we would need funding for in order to run the program effectively. One of the things that we do see often is we're just hurrying to get any grant funds. Really, right now, a lot of nonprofits are in a position where they're hurting for funds. So let's just get some money in. But you really have to think thoughtfully about what does our budget look like for that program? And we don't want to take a loss. If it's going to take 3 people to run the program, we want to make sure that we're budgeting effectively and sending that budget onto our funder to make sure that we're getting enough funding. So when we're talking about a high quality budget, There are a couple of different budgets that your funder may ask for. There's your operating budget, which is also known as your master budget. And then there's a grant budget. So your operating budget is your expected revenue and expenses for your coming year. A lot of people are high into the budget season right now. We have a lot of clients that have a March year end. So they're looking towards April as their next fiscal, and this is really budget season. And so your operating budget would include any of these projects that you're running. However, your grant budget is the cost associated with the project that you're seeking funds for. So most of that is direct costs. You're going to factor in things like staff involvement, including management and time to prepare reports for the funding organizations. So Rohit touched on that. You really want to carefully consider a couple of things here. How much time am I putting into applying for this? But also, how much time am I going to spend reporting to the funder? So when I was an executive director in Cambridge, there was one grant, and I won't tell you who the funder was, but we did receive money monthly from them. Yet the reporting requirements took days every quarter. It was really, really extensive and arduous. And that's one of the things that you really want to seek out too, because you want to make sure that you're prepared to do that type of reporting. So in this case, we had to do surveys and we had to provide deliverables in very real ways. So you want to make sure that you're carving out enough time to be compliant with your funder. It's not just a matter of getting a budget together. Oh my gosh, we'd be so happy to get $10,000. And then you get the funds and then you've spent $20,000 in time trying to get that project going. You want to include funding to cover admin costs. And we have seen some funders not want to include that admin line. It's really important. It does cover things like technology, some rent, some bookkeeping. You can take parts of your master budget and then put a percentage into that particular grant application for that project, because you need all of those things. You need the lights on, you need rent, and some of your grants are going to require a separate budget, a separate audit. And so you're going to want to factor in audit fees. We have come across several pots of money, several grantors that require a separate audit or greater transparency with the books. So you want to make sure you're factoring all of that as well. You want to make sure that your budget is very thorough. Now, why does a high quality budget even matter with a grant application? So Rohit talked about how, and I think it was in his intro, he has approved applications, he's reviewed applications. So you really want to make sure that your application sets you apart. What is it about your application that's going to make the funder take notice? So you want to make sure that your budget is so detailed and so well put together that it increases the likelihood of getting approved for your grant. Now, the grant that I applied for, and I'm going to say we applied for, because we did have board involvement and I had staff involvement. It really was a group effort. It was a team effort. We had a sobriety house. So a sobriety house is simply a stepping stone between going into rehab for an addiction and then getting integrated back into the community. So it's this intermediary home, group home, and we had one for men. It was a sobriety house, and I really had a dream to open one for women. And so we wanted to apply to Trillium. So I really wanted to think about what is going to set our grant application apart. So we already had, and this is something that we've talked about today already, we already had a track record with having one in place. So we had that as a bonus. We have a sobriety house for men. It's been open for a number of years. It's doing really well. But Trillium required a couple of things. They will grant for a number of years, but you really have to show project sustainability after the grant runs out. You have to prove how, once you open up this new project, this new house, this new addition, how are you going to run it after? And so it was a complex, more complex application. And one of the things we did was an environmental scan. And that was to prove to Trillium that there is a need in this region for that type of support. So we had to, gather stats, and so we paid someone to do an environmental scan. And then you want to take into consideration the salaries and the supplies and everything that's going to be required. We had to find a location before the grant was ever granted or approved. And we had to have all those costs in our budget. So when you're having a high quality budget that already includes not just hypotheticals, you've chosen a place that you're going to rent, you've got all of those ducks in a row, it really demonstrates your organization's professionalism, and it builds credibility with your funder. It helps determine exactly what you need to spend to run the program. So the more detailed and the more thought that you put into it, the more accurate your budget is going to be. It also helps produce an accurate report when it's time to report to the funders. So that's the other side of this, is the funder is often going to require that you now show transparency and accountability for how you spent the money. And it has to be in line with that budget that you provided before you even started running the program. So that's why it's really important to go back to that budget and make sure that it is a really good representation of what funds are going to be required to run that program and run it effectively. So we're going to talk about fiscal year ends and funder requirements. When I was an auditor in public accounting, and I only audited charities and nonprofits, a lot of the year ends were December. And what I've noticed in the last few years is a shift to nonprofits and charities moving to a March year end to align with grant funding. It makes that reporting easier. And I'm seeing increasingly nonprofits shifting. If you're not there, if you're still in a December year end or a different year end, just know that you can shift your year end with Canada Revenue Agency if you find that the brunt of your funding comes from funders with March year ends. It may be a really good move fiscally. Government funders typically do operate on a March year end, so charities can sometimes change to align. Funders now sometimes require organizations to raise their own funds. So when I used to do several grant applications, there would be a line there that the funder required and we had to report on it, sometimes monthly, sometimes quarterly. What money are you bringing in to supplement this program? So you want to think that through. Are we going to run a fundraiser? Are we going to have a separate mail campaign, or are we going to just take a portion of our donations and put it towards that program? But that is quite typical, that a funder doesn't want to see that you're solely relying on them to run this program. So if the program requires $100,000, you may be seeking $70,000 from them, and then you are needing to bring the extra. Several years ago, I approached the region of Waterloo for a program, and it's just a really, really good, solid program for helping the homeless in Ontario. It's a trust program where we help manage funds for people that are on welfare, which is OW, and ODSP, which is disability. And so we found that it really helps keep people housed when we can help them manage their money, help them budget, and they even saved. So when I approached the region, I already had a plan to come up with the rest of the funds. So I said, you know what, I found this one funder who I've met with, and they're willing to give us funds in perpetuity, which means they're going to give us funds every year to fund this program. And then I have this other grant that I got, and now I just need the rest. So sometimes when you have a plan, and it's almost like you're manifesting ahead of time, saying, you know what, we need to run this program. It's really integral. At the time we were running the program, it just wasn't funded. It was funded just by donations, general donations. And so sometimes it's really good to get multiple and diverse pots of money into one program as well. And some funders do require that. So how do we build a comprehensive budget for a grant proposal? You want to understand the funder's requirement first. So I will say every application I've ever put in, I have done a lot of research on the funder and what their requirements are. So you want to make sure that you qualify, that you're eligible, and that you are really a good fit. It's something that Rohit said, and it was really well said. You want to make sure you're a good fit. Because again, if they're getting 100 applications, you want to make sure that you're sort of hitting all of those requirements, not just 80% of them. Check if they provide a budget template. So you want to see the grant package, and a lot of them do have a budget template. So you want to start your planning around that. And you want to make sure that you get clarification. So a lot of funders are great with meeting ahead of time. So I did meet, if I'm going to use the example of Trillium, I did meet with Trillium. I attended webinars that they put on to talk about that branch of funding. And then I did meet with them and ask all of my questions before I even filled out the application. So there is no shame in that. You really want to advocate, get your face out there, get them to meet you and ask your questions. So you want to sit on tables and be a part of communities that give you exposure. So ONN is a great opportunity for you to have exposure to that network, LinkedIn, and then whatever circles you're running in, it's great to have exposure to your funders. You want to make sure you get clarification. Do they just want information for this one project? So in the case of Trillium, does Trillium just want the sobriety house information? Are they looking for a master budget? Do they want an overall program budget? Because you might just say, I'm looking for a grant for, 80% of this project I'm running. So is your funder only looking for a budget for the 80%? Most commonly, what you'll see is they're looking for an overall program budget. They want to see where you're pulling other funds in. Are you doing fundraising? Are you putting donations towards that? And they'll want to see a program budget because they want to see that the program is sustainable and how they're helping. So what is it that they're contributing to? You also want to really, and this is super important, what type of expenses are eligible is a big one. So can you buy new laptops with this funding? Can you have 4 full-time people? Is, office supplies allowed? You really want to see, they usually are very clear on what you can purchase and what you can. And some funders actually are really great about providing a little wiggle room. So if you contact your funder before the grant runs out and you say, hey, we're kind of running a little bit heavier on program supplies than IT, is it okay if we shift some of that budget around? And then they can approve that ahead of time. It's not a conversation you want to be having after the grant has closed, but I've seen in a lot of cases funders that are really flexible as long as you're having open dialogue. And it's not increasing the funding, it's just moving those lines around. So the other thing you want to make sure that you're really clear on is what time period does the grant cover? That may or may not align with your fiscal year end. So if it's running from April till March, you have to be cognizant of that. And your reporting has to be cognizant of that as well. So the project then has to run during that time. It's really important as well for funders to have clarity. So you want to ask, you want to investigate what level of detail are they expecting about salaries? So are they just asking, and a lot of the grant applications that we see will just say 2 FT, 2 full-time positions, and then a number. I've seen grant applications require names and salary points because there's actually, in my role at Enkel, I help a client fill out a quarterly report for a large amount of funding. And there are certain positions, CFO positions, CEO positions, they don't fund. And so they need to see names, they need to see salaries. It is very minute, the details that go into the reporting that is done quarterly. And so you need to figure that out ahead of time. Do we need to tell them who the salary is being paid to? And if you're thinking about that, is there a plan for that position to be running this program for the amount of time that the funds are being received? So if you are receiving a multi-year grant, do you have those positions in place? How much time are employees or contractors spending on the program? Do they need to know that? Do they need to know just an overall salary picture? They might just say, hey, we're giving you, $200,000 towards salaries, and however you put that into the program, that's up to you. It really depends on your funder. One note to consider is you want to factor in salary increases, bonuses, benefits. Okay, so if you are projecting increases, vacation payouts, bonuses in the next year or two, or however that grant is running, you really do have to factor that in. A lot of people fill out grant applications based on today's numbers. They don't factor that in, and then they're having to absorb those additional costs. So it just is part of that planning. And then for events, what are the specific dates and details? They likely want to know specific details around that if you are asking for a grant to run a specific event. Now, my final thoughts are on the grant budget. So small funders may have very simple budget requirements. And actually, we do see a lot of granting where you don't even require reporting. It's still important, though, to be thorough, and it's important to be transparent and accountable. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is, and it really ties into the importance of your budget, is we do see from time to time an underspend when it comes to budget. So I had a client a few years ago that they would underspend government funding. And really what ends up happening is, in a lot of cases, you have to pay the money back. If you don't have to pay the money back, it kind of puts you in a position to, the optics of that can look like you don't need the money. So again, you really want to put a lot of time and effort into budgeting the program that you're asking money for. And then you should plan to spend the money. Work closely with your teammates to determine costs. So again, if you're just looking at it from your desk and you're trying to figure out, what this is going to cost. When I did that trillion budget, I had a lot of team members involved in that. People that were going to deliver the program, the person that was working in accounting, different teammates to say, okay, this is what it would require for us to do this. It's really important to get buy-in from the people that are actually going to be delivering your program. Ensure that your grant budget aligns with proposal narratives. And once again, best advice, be thorough. The more details that you provide, the less you'll have to be figuring things out later. You want to also make sure that you're demonstrating financial sustainability, so that if I'm investing in your organization, if I'm a funder, I really want to make sure that there is financial stability. So have confidence in your books. You want to make sure they're current, they're accurate, they're reliable. Strong processes are in place for financial operations. Make sure that you have a good bookkeeping team. Make sure that you've got your books audited. This is all going to be requested likely from your funder, that you've had your audit. You want to make sure that there's visibility, accountability to your monthly financial statements, that you have robust financial controls in place. And this is really a focus point of auditors now, is what type of controls are available in your agency to mitigate risk. You want to demonstrate a strong financial position. What does that mean? It means that you have enough reserves and enough of a strong financial position that you're going to be here for the foreseeable future. There's a saying, nobody wants to invest in a sinking ship, right? So you want to really prove to your funder, we're here to stay, we're doing great work, and we want you to be just as excited about what we're doing and join in. So organizational resilience, reserves in place, balanced, or a surplus position. So you're either at a net zero or you're in a surplus position. You have a good board of directors, a credible board of directors. Your history of your organization is solid. Your financial statements and information related to the past is open and accessible. You've had past successes. You want to talk about that in your grant application. You want to talk about your successes. You want to sell yourself as an agency, an organization. Have a strategic plan in place. So make sure that you're on a current 2 to 3 strategic plan and that your budget is in place for the agency for the next year. Then it's really important that you demonstrate that the program can self-sustain itself after the grant's over. So again, if someone's granting you for a year, what are you going to do to ensure that that program is still running? And you want to make sure that you're looking at a diverse income stream in perpetuity, which simply means it keeps coming year after year after year. That's stability. We want to look at that long-term goal, not just a short term. So what are you doing to ensure that there's some type of revenue coming in to keep this program running? Kind of keep those unknowns to a bare minimum. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate the opportunity. And I'll look really quickly to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, there are questions. So Shelly asked, how do you show that you're not double dipping?
That's a great question, Shelley. So the way that we do this in reporting is when you are reporting admin costs, we actually do. So let's say we're working in a program like QuickBooks Online. What we do in your financial statements is we actually remove those costs from your general fund or your admin, your general, and we remove it from there and we put it into that grant pot of money. So there's less. So let's say I give a donation and this donation is just admin donation. You can spend it on whatever you want. So you'll have that sort of pocket of money with your charity. We're going to remove that allowance over there and move it into your grant. So there is no double dipping. It's not just we're charging this grant or $2,000 in rent every month. You're really going to have to show that if rent is $5,000, then it's a total of $5,000. So $2,000 is going to this grant, $1,000 is going to this grant, and $2,000 is just being absorbed by general donations. So there is no allowance for double dipping. That's a fantastic question. Let's just see here. Do you have to?
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. You know what? Go ahead. You can read.
You can ask them. Kavita, you're on screen. Go ahead, ask them.
Do you have to have charitable status to run a fundraiser, for example, selling logo merchandise to raise awareness and funds?
Hi there. So that's a great question. I think so. The reason why you want to have charitable status is to provide charity receipts. And so thank you for that question. It's a great question. If you're just selling logo merchandise to raise funds, no, you don't have to have charitable status. The reason why you want to have charitable status is to provide charitable receipts, be able to tap into donations, and be seen as a charity. So the answer to that is no, as long as the people and really they're getting a return. So because they're getting a return, they're getting merchandise, they wouldn't be eligible for a charitable receipt anyways. So that's no, you don't have to.
Is there a dollar figure or number of months of operating expenses that funders look for organizations to have in reserves when they are approving grants? And
that's a great
questions might also come to you. So everyone certainly feel free to ask Rohit and Christine questions at this point as we sort of look to wrap up.
Yeah, and Rohit, feel free to step in here as well. We always we always say 6 months to a year of reserves. And now from the grantor or the funder lens, Rohit might be better equipped. We're looking at it from a financial stability lens. So as a rule of thumb, as a controller, if you're asking me as a CFO or controller, I'm always going to say the best way to prove financial stability is to have at least 6 months of reserves put aside.
Great, and I'll just jump in here. Thanks, Christine. So Ontario Trillium seems to lead in this area for all granting institutions in Ontario, and many seem to follow what they do. They say that if you have more than 12 months of reserves, in other words, the money in your accounts represents more than 12 months of your operating cost, you have to provide an explanation. Right, so I think back to an organization I was involved with that built a giant trail in Orangeville, $1 million project. And when we were applying for grants, I remember the first time I looked at their financials, I thought, oh my God, they have so much money that no funder is going to fund them. But no, the money that they had was earmarked for the development of that trail. In their financials, it would show that the money was earmarked for a future project. And when they applied to Trillium, they just had to explain, yeah, I know we have, 700,000 or 800,000 at this time. That's for that project. So that's not really our money. It has nothing to do with our operation. It's put aside. But many funders don't expect you to have a minimum reserve either. They don't expect you to have, a certain number of months, or they won't fund you. Nonprofit funders are often expecting money in, money out, right? But I think, building on what Christine said, you should go with that guidance.
And then years ago, there used to be a guide of no more than 15% in admin costs. Like the average that I definitely see is 10 to 15. Rohit, what are you seeing these days? Is there a cap at all?
Well, what I would say is in any grant, it's pretty likely that you can apply for up to 15%. If they give you more, apply for it. Go ahead, right? If they're giving you 20% admin, celebrate and ask for it. And the interesting thing is that they'll approve it. I remember being in the room at an Ontario Trillium Foundation grant review committee meeting, and there was a $400,000 grant on the table, and the admin represented 60,000, and they just got approved like that. And I was shocked because I thought, oh my God, their admin represents more than some people's entire grant applications, but it got approved just like that because at the time Trillium had a policy where they would just approve the admin without any questions. Today, you actually have to provide a very detailed description of what you plan to do with that 15%. But at the time, I thought this is an incredible opportunity for organizations who often need admin support. Generally, the rule is ask for up to 15%, and it should be granted.
All right, well, that is all
for all the questions. I'll give people one more opportunity to put anything in the chat or in the Q&A box, but going once or twice, I think we're good. Okay, well, again, thank you so much to Christine and Rohit for your super insightful presentations. As someone who's in communications and not in finance, this is very enlightening for me. Certainly terms and words that I don't engage with on a daily basis. So thank you for spending this time. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will share both of their slides and a link to the recording. So thank you so much for joining us today, everyone online. Thank you, and thank you for your engagement and questions, and we'll see you next time. Have a good afternoon.